On that cold night, Caleb sat motionless in the darkness of an abandoned garage, where the faint neon light from his small flashlight flickered on his desk. Pages of faded C++ textbooks scattered before him, like fragments of a dream that was never meant to be completed. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken, the marks of sleepless nights spent torn between his job as a security guard and an unfulfilled burning desire he didn't know where to channel. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the stillness. A figure appeared in the dim light. It was a man, not a stranger, but John, the man in a simple coat, not a CEO, just a tired man with a watchful gaze. He stood still, staring intently at Caleb, as though reading every worry, every dream of the man sitting opposite him. Caleb stiffened, feeling exposed, but he couldn't ignore John's presence. They stood there, facing each other in silence. John's footsteps were slow, each step reminding Caleb of the long days he had endured. John wasn't rushing, just observing, and when the surrounding space felt heavier than ever, he spoke. "What are you doing here in the dark?" His voice wasn't rushed, wasn't judgmental, but carried an indescribable gentleness. A question that, in Caleb's eyes, was the beginning of an encounter that would change everything. He looked up, trying to regain his composure, his voice trembling. "I'm studying," Caleb replied, feeling the need to protect that fragile dream. He was about to turn off the flashlight to hide the book that was half open, but his hands shook, and John's words stopped him. "Don't," John said, his tone lacking mockery. "Keep going." Caleb was taken aback. Those words weren't like typical consolations. There was no pity, no pretense, just a strange respect that made him stop. His eyes fell back on the book, his hands still trembling, but he didn't turn off the light. Caleb knew that he wasn't just learning a programming language or working as a night guard. He was facing a bigger decision, an opportunity that might come only once in a lifetime. John stood there like an observer, but not just an outsider. He had seen himself in Caleb's eyes, seen the dreams buried, the efforts unknown, and John knew that this time he couldn't turn away. Silence enveloped the space, only the sound of wind whistling through the broken window gaps, creating a fragmented noise like exhaustion spreading through every corner of the garage. Caleb remained sitting there, his hand on the C++ book, but no longer reading. His eyes wandered, staring at the faded pages without seeing anything. He had once believed that if he worked hard and didn't give up, everything would change. But now he wasn't so sure. John wasn't in a hurry. He stood there, his eyes never leaving Caleb. The faint light from the flashlight reflected on Caleb's face, painting a picture of sweat-streaked skin and the marks of many sleepless nights. He knew Caleb was someone like he used to be, a person full of ambition, but crushed by the harshness of life. Caleb felt a strange energy from the man standing before him, someone he couldn't figure out. John wasn't like the others, the ones who had passed through Caleb's life without leaving a trace. He wasn't a stranger. He was a companion, though distant, but somehow closer in a way that couldn't be explained. "What are you thinking?" John asked, his voice gentle but not weak. "Do you think this is all you're ever going to be?" Caleb looked up, his eyes clouded with a thin mist. He wanted to answer, but each word got stuck in his throat. Everything he had once believed in now seemed like shattered pieces, torn apart by the pressure of failure and hopelessness. He wasn't even sure what he was doing anymore. "I don't know," Caleb whispered, his voice sounding like he was admitting something he hadn't dared admit before. "I just want to do something meaningful. Once more." John didn't laugh, didn't say anything. He only moved closer, standing beside Caleb. The light from the flashlight illuminated the space, and Caleb felt John's breath, the breath of a man who had passed through everything Caleb was going through, but still carried the marks of the past. John placed his hand on Caleb's shoulder, an unexpected gesture, but one filled with meaning. "We all have moments when we want to give up," John said, his voice lowering, as though he were speaking to himself. "But those are the most important moments, the ones when we have to stand up and keep going, no matter what." Caleb looked at his hands, his fingers still trembling, but no longer from fear. Now they trembled with a newfound determination. He lifted his head, his eyes shining with an odd brightness. "Thank you," he said, though he didn't fully understand why he felt grateful. John smiled softly. You may not know it now, but you're on the path to finding yourself. Not to please anyone, but to please yourself. A gust of wind blew through, carrying a sense of renewal. The air in the room felt lighter, and even though it was still heavy, Caleb sensed something different. A new light had begun to flicker within him, like a spark of hope igniting in the darkness. I'll try, Caleb whispered, for the first time in a long while, feeling as though he wasn't drowning in despair. Instead, he felt like he was beginning a new journey. Even though the road ahead was still full of challenges, the sleepless nights had become Caleb's constant companion. The garage still bore the marks of those long, sleepless hours. Old textbooks, cold cups of coffee, and the clattering of the keyboard under his hands. But now something felt different. The determination he had once felt as a faint spark had now ignited into a blazing torch. One rainy night, as Caleb was lost in the familiar flow of code, a sudden knock on the door interrupted him. He looked up, the weak light from the flashlight shining directly into his eyes, but it didn't diminish the strange feeling creeping over him. It was at that moment that Caleb realized there was a force beyond him influencing his life. Nothing was by chance. John stood at the door, his hair soaked, his black coat drenched in the rain. He didn't enter right away, but stood at the threshold, his eyes searching for an answer Caleb had never asked. Still not sleeping? John asked, his tone without accusation, only deep concern. Caleb looked at John, not responding immediately. He could feel the understanding in John's gaze. A man who seemed to have walked through similar paths and understood the exhaustion. John didn't need to say anything more. His eyes conveyed it all. I can't stop, Caleb finally answered, his voice tired but full of resolve. I have to make it. John didn't say a word, just stood there, observing Caleb. The sleepless nights, the sweat beads on his forehead, the failures and the total exhaustion. Everything had shaped Caleb into the person he was today. John saw something deeper in his eyes, a desire that would never extinguish, a determination that nothing could put out. You will make it, John said, not as a question, but as a confirmation. But you need to understand that sometimes it's not about pushing forward endlessly. There are times when we have to stop and reflect on how far we've come. Caleb pondered. He understood what John was saying, but deep inside he still felt heavy, unable to stop, unable to stand still for even a moment. His dreams, his unyielding efforts, they all led to a goal he still hadn't reached. He wasn't ready to stand still. I won't stop, Caleb affirmed, his eyes lost in the night outside the window. I'll keep going, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how many failures. I can't give up. John stood there watching Caleb, not rushing, not forcing him, just silently acknowledging that each path has its own choices. And in Caleb's eyes, John saw something very familiar, a fire that would never die out, no matter how the world might spin around it. Then keep going, John said. But remember, sometimes we need to find a way to move through the darkness without losing our direction. Caleb stared at John for a long moment, then nodded. In that instant, he realized that his path was no longer a solitary one. His steps were no longer just for the sake of chasing a dream. He was also finding himself along the way, and people like John would always be there, even if only as a small light in the darkness. And so Caleb returned to his work. But this time, he didn't feel exhausted. He didn't feel alone. He could feel the strength within him, the silent support from the man who understood him better than anyone else. The faint light from the flashlight illuminated the space in the garage, but Caleb felt something shift in the atmosphere. Everything seemed different. Those long, sleepless nights were no longer just time passing in vain. Every minute now had meaning. Every line of code was a steady step forward. In the following days, Caleb began to feel something new within himself. The difficulties, the mockery, the doubtful glances from those around him no longer seemed to bother him. Even so, there was something deep inside him that still hadn't found peace. He still felt as though something was missing, a form of validation that could only come from within him, from his own efforts. That night, as Caleb worked on the laptop that John had brought, he received an unexpected call. On the other end was the familiar voice of Lily, his sister. "Do you remember the promise you made?" Lily asked, her voice gentle but with a hint of concern. Caleb paused for a moment, then smiled lightly. What promise? You promised you wouldn't give up. You promised that the long nights wouldn't make you forget why you started. You promised me. Lily's voice was filled with care, but also determination. Caleb put the laptop down, his hand still holding the old pen tightly. He looked out the window where the night sky was heavy with dark clouds. Lily's words were a reminder that sparked something within him. I know, Lily. I know that promise, and I will keep it. Not just for you, but for myself, Caleb said, his voice deep and sure. Lily laughed softly over the phone, then paused. I knew you would, but remember, you don't always have to do it alone. Caleb looked up at the flashlight still on and felt a sense of steadiness within him. His steps were no longer just about surviving, but about proving to himself, to those who believed in him and helped him during tough times. He wouldn't let the darkness win. After the call, Caleb went back to the laptop more determined than ever. Every number, every line of code was no longer just random characters, but steps forward, marks on the road he had chosen. Caleb no longer felt the solitude in his work. He realized that, even in the darkness, even during the long, sleepless nights, he wasn't alone. His persistence, his belief, and his family's love had always been the light guiding him. Tomorrow would come, and Caleb was ready. The next day, Caleb woke up with a different feeling. He looked at the repaired laptop, now working smoothly, and could sense a distinct improvement. It wasn't because the long, sleepless nights were over, but because he realized that his efforts had never been in vain. Despair was no longer an option. What he had witnessed, the decisions he made in the dark, were beginning to produce visible changes. Lily had always been the one who believed in him from the very start, but now he felt he wasn't working just for her. He was working for himself. It was as if he had broken through an invisible wall that had always stood in his way. Each day that passed, Caleb felt himself getting closer to his dream, closer to a future that was no longer a distant illusion, but something he could clearly see. However, life was never easy. That morning, as he walked into the office, everything seemed normal. But the atmosphere in the company that day felt tenser. The gossip, the wary glances. Caleb was no stranger to them, but now they no longer scared him. As usual, he sat at his desk, where the laptop he had repaired was running smoothly. But just then, a colleague walked up to him, eyeing him with a look of scrutiny. Still sitting there, Miller? Not playing games on that old computer again, are you? The colleague asked mockingly. Caleb didn't respond right away. He had grown accustomed to such comments. Those words no longer lingered in his mind like they used to. He took a deep breath and looked directly at his colleague. No, I'm working. What about you? Caleb replied, his tone calm yet firm. The colleague smirked and turned away. Caleb didn't pay him any more attention. He returned his focus to the computer, looking at the bright screen. Despite the harsh words, the spiteful looks, Caleb knew that they didn't define his reality. He knew that he was on his own path, and that was all that mattered. At lunch, Caleb sat with Lily in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe. She looked at him with concern. You're doing it, Caleb. I can see you getting closer to your goal, Lily said, her voice filled with encouragement. Caleb smiled lightly, a rare smile in recent days. Do you believe in me, Lily? Caleb asked, his eyes full of gratitude. Not just me, but you have to believe in yourself. Every small step leads to a big success. Never forget that I will always be here, Lily said, gently taking his hand. That feeling, the warmth from Lily's sincere words, made Caleb feel empowered. Even though the world outside could be harsh, he had his family, the people who believed in him, and most importantly, he believed in himself. When he returned to the office, he no longer felt fear or insecurity. Caleb knew that, no matter what challenges came his way, he would stand strong. He had finally realized that he wasn't just fighting for survival, but proving his worth, and that made all the difference. The next day, Caleb walked into the office with a completely different mindset. He no longer felt the suffocating anxiety or self-doubt he used to experience. He entered the office not with worry, but with the confidence he had built little by little. The mocking comments and disdainful glances from his colleagues no longer bothered him. They were a part of the past, something that could never overshadow the growth he had achieved. One morning, while Caleb was checking his emails at his desk, he received an unexpected call from John. His voice no longer sounded distant or cold, but encouraging and full of trust. "Caleb, I want you to join a major project. This is your chance to step out of the shadows of your old role. Are you ready?" John asked. Caleb looked at the computer screen, his hand clutching the mouse. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the anticipation of a real opportunity. This wasn't just another task. This was a chance to prove to himself and the world that he could succeed. "Yes, I'm ready," Caleb replied, his voice steady and confident. After that call, Caleb realized that everything had changed. He was no longer the person confined to working behind the scenes. He was now an integral part of a team, and this was a chance to show the value he could bring. It was more than just a job. It was a challenge to prove his worth to himself. The next day, Caleb joined the project John had mentioned. The project wasn't just important, it had a profound significance for his career. It was a strategic initiative involving key players in the industry. Caleb had to collaborate with various teams, solve complex problems, and come up with creative solutions he never thought he was capable of. Though the work wasn't easy, Caleb no longer felt alone on this journey. He had learned how to collaborate, how to share ideas, and most importantly, how to stand tall, presenting his thoughts without fear of judgment. Every day, the work became more engaging. Meetings were no longer a challenge. They became opportunities for Caleb to showcase his skills. He didn't stop learning, didn't stop improving, and every time he successfully solved a problem, he felt himself moving closer to his goal. During an important meeting with the project team, Caleb had the opportunity to present a breakthrough solution to a problem that the team had been struggling with for an entire week. As he finished presenting, the room fell silent for a moment, before heads nodded in agreement and appreciative glances were exchanged. John, standing at the corner of the room, smiled with satisfaction, his gaze no longer filled with doubt but with recognition. "We found the solution." "Caleb, well done," John said. His words weren't just praise but an acknowledgement that Caleb had earned his place. As Caleb left the meeting, he felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. It wasn't just the joy of a victory at work, it was the fulfillment that came from knowing he had finally stepped into his true potential. He was no longer the security guard hiding in the shadows. He was a person who had proven his worth. When he returned home, Caleb sat down at the dinner table with Lily. He smiled, no longer the weary or forced smile he had shown before. He looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he truly belonged. "You can be proud of me now," Caleb said, his voice calm but full of confidence. Lily looked at him, her eyes beaming with pride. "I've always been proud of you, Caleb. You've done it." They didn't say anything more. Everything that needed to be said was reflected in their eyes, in their smiles, and in the moments they shared together. Caleb knew that the road ahead was still long, but he had taken the first step, and now he didn't feel alone on that journey. With that first step, Caleb had proven that change didn't come from waiting, it came from a determination to never give up. And from now on, he would no longer look at the future with uncertainty, but with the firm belief that he could achieve anything. The meeting began with sharp, cold glances from the investors, each one wearing a mask of seriousness, their eyes focused on the smallest details. Caleb stood in the middle of the room, feeling as if every eye was on him. But this time, he didn't feel afraid. He was ready. Everything inside him had changed, and even he could feel the difference in each step he took. John stood beside him, a strong presence, silently observing. But he wasn't just a bystander. He was the one who had given Caleb this opportunity. He didn't speak. He just watched and waited, like a mentor observing his student face a great challenge. Caleb looked at the crowd, then at the projector screen. Everything he needed to say had been prepared in his mind. He took a deep breath, then stepped forward, stopping in front of the desk. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caleb Miller from the Security and Technical Oversight Department." His voice rang out clearly, confidently, no longer wavering. He gestured toward the screen and began explaining the data he had prepared over the past few days. The numbers, graphs, and strategic plans were presented logically. Every word he spoke wasn't just an explanation. It was a declaration of a man who no longer stood in the shadows. As the minutes passed, Caleb could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting. The harsh glares began to change. Some people nodded in agreement, Others exchanged impressed glances, but there was no longer any scorn or derision. Instead, there was recognition. One of the investors, who had always been one of the harshest critics, suddenly spoke up. "Caleb, I have to admit, I didn't think you could pull it off. But today, you've proven me wrong." "Chirin." Caleb looked up, his eyes shining in an unusual way, not from pride, but from the relief of realizing that he wasn't wrong to believe in himself. He had overcome the mockery, the sleepless nights, and now everyone could finally see his value. The meeting ended better than he could have imagined. As the investors filed out, John stood beside Caleb, giving him a gentle pat on the back. "Well done, Caleb. You did a great job," John said, his gaze no longer filled with doubt, but full of recognition and trust. Caleb smiled, not because of the victory, but because he knew that he was no longer the shadow of himself. He had stood up, dared to change, and most importantly, he had never given up. His transformation wasn't just in his work, but in how he saw himself. As Caleb walked back to his office after the meeting, he received different looks from his colleagues. They no longer saw him as before. Now they respected him. The gossip had lost its power because Caleb had shown that he wasn't just a security guard. He was someone of greater value than anything they had ever assumed. When he walked through the office door, Caleb felt a sense of peace. He knew he had passed the biggest test of his life, but what mattered more was that he had won against himself. The next day, Caleb walked into the office with a completely different attitude. There was no longer any sense of anxiety or fear when he saw familiar faces. There were no more disdainful glances or mocking looks. He walked past his colleagues, eyes straight ahead, his posture confident, as if he had weathered a great storm and was now stepping into the light. John stood in the corner of the room observing everything. He knew that while Caleb had won the meeting the day before, this was only the real battle. The battle wasn't just with others, but with himself. Because success doesn't only come from what we show, but from our ability to maintain that change, to not fall back into the shadows of our old selves. "You did well," John said when Caleb walked over. His voice was deep, full of acknowledgement. Caleb smiled, but instead of a smile of pride, it was a soft smile, as if he was telling himself, "I've done it." The entire day felt different. The conversations no longer revolved around mockery or condescension. Instead, people began to pay attention to what Caleb said. They started asking for his opinions in important decisions. He was invited to meetings, not just because he was part of the team, but because he truly had something to contribute. He wasn't just a security guard anymore. He was someone who had proven his value. When evening came, Caleb went home, but this time, he didn't return with exhaustion or despair. This time, he came home with a newfound belief, knowing that he had not only achieved something in his work, but had also proven to himself that his dreams were not unattainable. And most importantly, he knew that his journey was just beginning. That night at the dinner table, Lily sat across from him. She looked at him with concern and pride. "You did it, didn't you?" Lily asked, her voice gentle, yet full of confidence. Caleb smiled, a warm smile that came from deep inside. "I did, Lily. I really did." He gently placed his hand on the table, looking into her eyes. "Thank you for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Lily smiled and gently squeezed his hand. "We did it together. You know that, right?" Caleb nodded, his eyes lighting up in a way they hadn't before. "Yes, Lily, we're going forward together." And in the long nights of studying, in the long hours of work, Caleb no longer felt alone. He had a clear goal, a reason to wake up each morning and keep moving forward. The struggles and challenges were no longer barriers. They were the driving forces that helped him rise. And one day, not only Lily, but the whole world would recognize him as someone who truly succeeded. The project Caleb was about to lead was just beginning, and he felt ready. He knew this was just the first step on a long road ahead, but he had found the belief in himself and in the wonderful things yet to come. Caleb's journey was not just the story of a man who stepped out of the shadows to find the light within himself, but a journey of growth, love, and the belief in the endless possibilities of a human being. A week passed quickly, and Caleb gradually adjusted to the changes at work. Every morning when he woke up, he no longer felt suffocated or filled with self-doubt like he had before. He walked into the office not with anxiety, but with the confidence he had built little by little. The mocking comments from his colleagues, the judgmental glances. Those things were now part of the past, something that could never overshadow the growth he had achieved. One morning, while Caleb was checking his email at his desk, he received an unexpected call from John. John's voice no longer sounded distant or cold. It was full of encouragement and trust. "Caleb, I want you to be part of a major project. This is your chance to step out of the shadow of your old role." "Are you ready?" John asked. Caleb looked at the computer screen, his hand gripping the mouse. His heart raced, but not from fear. This was the anticipation of a real opportunity. This wasn't just another task. This was a chance to prove to himself and to the world that he could succeed. "Yes, I'm ready," Caleb replied, his voice steady and full of conviction. After the call, Caleb realized that everything had changed. He was no longer the person stuck working in the background. Now, he was an essential part of a team, and this was his opportunity to show what he could contribute. It wasn't just a job, it was a challenge to prove his worth to himself. The following day, Caleb joined the project that John had mentioned. The project wasn't just important, it had profound significance for his career. It was a strategic initiative involving key players in the industry. Caleb had to collaborate with different teams, solve complex problems, and come up with creative solutions that he never thought he was capable of. Although the work wasn't easy, Caleb no longer felt alone in this journey. He had learned to collaborate, to share ideas, and most importantly, to stand tall and present his thoughts without fear of being judged. Every day, the work became more rewarding. The meetings were no longer challenges. They were opportunities for Caleb to showcase his skills. He didn't stop learning, didn't stop improving, and every time he solved a problem successfully, he felt closer to his goal. In one important meeting with the project team, Caleb had the chance to present a groundbreaking solution to a problem that the team had been struggling with for a week. When he finished his presentation, the room fell silent for a moment, then heads began to nod and appreciative looks were exchanged. John, standing at the corner of the room, smiled in satisfaction, his gaze no longer filled with doubt, but with recognition. "We found the solution. Caleb, well done," John said. His words weren't just praise, they were an acknowledgement of Caleb's hard work. As Caleb left the meeting, he felt an unusual sense of happiness. It wasn't just the joy of success at work, it was the fulfillment that came from knowing he had truly stepped into his potential. He was no longer the security guard hiding in the shadows, he was someone who had proven his worth. When he got home, Caleb sat down at the dinner table with Lily. He smiled, no longer with the tired or forced smile he had worn before. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he truly belonged. "You can be proud of me now," Caleb said, his voice calm but filled with confidence. Lily looked at him, her eyes shining with pride. "I've always been proud of you, Caleb. You've done it." They didn't need to say anything more. Everything that needed to be said was reflected in their eyes, their smiles, and the moments they shared together. Caleb knew the road ahead was still long, but he had taken the first step, and now he didn't feel alone on that journey. With that first step, Caleb had proven that change doesn't come from waiting. It comes from the determination to never give up. And from now on, he would no longer look at the future with uncertainty. He would look forward with the strong belief that he could achieve anything. A month had passed since Caleb began working on the major project with John, and everything in his life had changed in ways he hadn't imagined before. Every morning when he woke up, he no longer felt tired or filled with anxiety. He no longer lived just to work. Now, he worked to live, to contribute, and to create value for himself and those around him. The project Caleb was part of was progressing well, and he had become an essential member of the team. His colleagues, who had once seen him as a failure, now looked at him with respect and admiration. Caleb wasn't just showing his talents. He was inspiring those around him, helping them realize that anyone could change and rise if they persisted and believed in themselves. One day while Caleb was working in the office, John walked in and looked at him with a different expression. It was no longer the look of someone giving orders, but the look of someone who trusted and acknowledged him. "Caleb," John said, his voice calm but full of respect, "you've done great. I think it's time for you to lead your own project. This is an opportunity for you to show your leadership skills." John's words came like a compliment, but also a new challenge that Caleb now had to face. He stood still, surprised and a little confused. This offer wasn't just recognition for his efforts. It was an opportunity to step into a new level, a chance to lead others and prove that nothing was impossible if one had persistence and passion. "I don't know what to say," Caleb replied, his voice deep, "but I'll do my best." John smiled and nodded. "I know you will." The feeling of nervousness and doubt rose within Caleb, but at the same time, he felt a new sense of confidence rising in him. This was his chance to truly step out of his past shadow, to lead others, to show that he was more than just what people had once thought of him. That evening, when Caleb got home, he sat down with Lily at the dinner table. She looked at him with concern and pride. "Caleb, you've changed so much. I'm so proud of you," Lily said, her voice gentle but full of admiration. Caleb smiled, but his gaze turned to the old picture of him and Lily hanging on the wall. He thought back to the difficult days when he was just a security guard, dreaming of a future that seemed so far away. But now he knew those hardships were just a part of the journey to his growth. And more than anything, he felt more confident than ever about the path he was on. "I couldn't have done it without you," Caleb said, his voice low but full of emotion. "You've been my greatest source of encouragement." Lily smiled and gently squeezed his hand. "We'll move forward together, won't we?" Caleb nodded, his eyes lighting up in a way they hadn't before. "Yes, Lily, we'll move forward together." And in the long nights of studying, in the long hours of work, Caleb no longer felt alone. He had found a clear goal, a reason to wake up every morning and keep moving forward. The struggles and challenges were no longer barriers. They were the driving forces that helped him rise. And one day, not just Lily, but the whole world would recognize him as someone who had truly succeeded. The project Caleb would now lead was about to begin, and he felt ready. He knew that this was only the first step on a long journey ahead, but he had found the belief in himself and the wonderful things yet to come. Caleb's journey wasn't just the story of a man who stepped out of the shadows to find the light within himself. It was a journey of growth, love, and belief in the limitless potential of a human being. Thank you for following this story with us. If you found this video inspiring or it helped you see life in a new light, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any exciting and meaningful videos in the future. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next videos. Wishing you strength and confidence on your journey.